Welcome back to my YouTube channel. The china clinked, a sound as delicate and fragile as the family peace we were all pretending to enjoy. Mom's 70th birthday dinner was a masterpiece of illusion. Roasted chicken with thyme, her favorite peonies in a cut crystal vase, and smiles polished to a high shine. I had spent the afternoon kneading dough for the sourdough, the rhythmic push and pull a meditation against the low hum of my anxiety. This house, this family, had always felt like a too-tight shoe, but tonight, I was determined to walk comfortably in it. That's when my brother, David, cleared his throat, tapping his fork against his champagne flute. The conversation died down. He stood, a picture of paternal authority in his crisp blue shirt. "A toast to Mom," he began, his voice oozing warmth. We all raised our glasses. "And," he continued, his eyes scanning the table before landing on me, "I have some good news that will take a weight off everyone's mind. Your empty house is sold." The words hung in the air, unfamiliar and sharp. My empty house, the little craftsman bungalow with the sagging porch and overgrown rose bushes, the one I'd poured every spare cent and every ounce of my hope into after the divorce. It was my sanctuary, my future Airbnb dream, the tangible proof that I had built something from the ashes of my failed marriage. The silence was broken by Aunt Carol's chirpy, "Oh, David, that's wonderful." David's gaze was steady on me, challenging. The offer came in strong. "Someone had to pay your debts, Alara. We couldn't let you drown in them any longer." A chorus of agreement rippled around the table. My mother nodded, her eyes soft with what looked like pity. "It was for the best, dear. You were so overwhelmed after everything." My uncle patted my hand. "David handled everything. You don't have to worry about a thing. Handled everything." The words were a cage. They had discussed me, my finances, my life, as if I were a problem to be solved. They saw my ambition as a burden, my independence as a cry for help. The debt they so righteously referenced was from my ex-husband's failed business, a chain I had been diligently breaking, one link at a time. The house was my freedom, and they had sold it out from under me, cloaking their violation in the language of concern. I remained silent. My silence wasn't acquiescence. It was a dam holding back a flood of fury. It was the quiet of a predator before the strike. I looked at each of their faces, memorizing the placid approval, the utter certainty that they knew what was best for me. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a clarity I hadn't possessed in years. They had shown me who they were, and I believed them. We were passing around slices of my homemade lemon meringue pie when the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," David's wife chirped, bustling toward the foyer. But the people who entered didn't wait for an invitation. Two of them, a man and a woman, their postures rigid, their faces unreadable. They wore windbreakers over dark clothing, and in the soft golden light of the dining room, the yellow letters on their backs were a brutal, shocking contrast. U.S. Marshal. The room froze. A fork clattered onto a plate. "David Miller?" the female marshal asked, her voice cool and professional. David stood up, his face a confused mask. "Yes, can I help you? We have a warrant for your arrest." The words were clean, precise, cutting through the genteel atmosphere like a scalpel. "For wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the Miranda rights were drowned out by the gasps around the table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, but my eyes were on David. I saw the facade crumble, the confident patriarch replaced by a pale, sweating man. The strong offer on my house. The debts he was so nobly paying. The pieces clicked into a horrifying, perfect picture. As they guided him out, his hands cuffed behind him, his gaze briefly met mine. And in that fleeting moment, I allowed the mask to drop. I didn't look shocked. I didn't look horrified. I simply looked, knowing the empty house was sold. But it was never about the house. That house was just a structure, 4 walls and a roof. What they truly tried to sell was my spirit, my resilience, my right to fight my own battles. They tried to auction off my dignity to cover for a thief. They were wrong. Losing that house was the best thing that ever happened to me. It emptied me of the need for their approval. It cleared out the clutter of their condescension and made space for an unshakable foundation of my own making. So, I leave you with this. Your family, your friends, your critics, they will write narratives for your life. They will call your struggles debts and their interference rescue. Do not let them. Your silence can be your greatest strength. Your pain can be the fuel for your rebirth. Leave a legacy, not an empty house for others to sell. Let them whisper about your debts. Then, quietly, methodically, build an empire so unshakable that the only announcement they can make at your birthday is one of awe. The world will try to sell you out. Don't you dare do the same to yourself. Your story isn't over. The foundation has just been poured. Now build. The illusion of stability was a performance we had perfected over decades, a play in which everyone knew their lines and their blocking by heart. That night, for Mom's 70th, the set was dressed to perfection. I remember the specific, almost sacred quality of the light in her dining room, the way the low, golden sun of the late afternoon streamed through the bay window, catching the dust motes dancing above the heirloom silver. The air was thick with the comforting aromas of roasted chicken and rosemary, a scent my mother insisted was the very fragrance of family itself. I had arrived early, my arms laden with groceries and a nervous energy I couldn't quite quell. Kneading the sourdough at her kitchen counter, my fists sinking into the resilient living dough, was a desperate attempt to anchor myself. The repetitive motion was a prayer, a plea for the evening to be smooth, for the fault lines that ran deep beneath our family's polished surface to remain hidden for just a few more hours. I watched my sister arrange the peonies, each bloom a burst of curated joy, and saw my brother-in-law meticulously polishing already gleaming wine glasses. Every action was a brick laid carefully in the wall of this perfect tableau. The laughter that echoed from the living room sounded rehearsed, the conversations a familiar script of safe topics. The weather, a cousin's new job, the relentless climb of the hydrangeas by the fence. We were all complicit, weaving this beautiful, fragile tapestry of normalcy, choosing to ignore the thinness of the threads and the sharp scissors that were, even then, moving silently toward the center of the room. The betrayal was delivered not with a shout, but with a toast, wrapped in the language of compassion and concern. When my brother David tapped his glass and made his announcement, he didn't look like a thief. He looked like a savior. His voice was a calibrated instrument of paternal authority, projecting a weary responsibility that made the violation sound like a necessary intervention. "Your empty house is sold," he said, and the words, for a moment, simply did not compute. That house was not empty to me. It was full of ghosts and dreams. I could still feel the gritty texture of the original hardwood floors under my bare feet, smell the faint, sweet scent of the old roses that tapped against the bedroom window, and see the exact spot on the porch where I had sat and cried after the divorce, watching the sunset and promising myself I would rebuild. But in his narrative, it was just an empty house, a liability. And then came the killer blow, the line designed to absolve them all and cast me as the irresponsible child. Someone had to pay your debts. He let that hang in the air, a cloud of shared judgment. He wasn't just selling a property. He was selling a story to the rest of the family, the story of my incapacity and his noble sacrifice. The debt, of course, was my ex-husband's, a chain I had been methodically, painstakingly melting down with every overtime shift and frugal meal. But in their eyes, it was a permanent stain on my character, an eternal excuse to treat my life as a problem they were entitled to solve. The nods that traveled around the table were not just agreements. They were a collective sigh of relief that David had once again taken charge and cleaned up messy Alara's mess. They were approving of the story he told about me, a story where I was the damsel in distress, and he was the knight, slaying the dragon of my financial instability, even if it meant burning my castle to the ground. My silence was not empty. It was a vast and crowded space, filled with the roaring of my own blood and the crystalline shattering of every illusion I had ever held about these people. As their approving murmurs washed over me, a cold, sharp clarity descended, cutting through the initial shock and the hot, rising tide of betrayal. In that silence, I was not the woman they thought I was, the fragile, recently divorced creature who needed her decisions made for her. I was an archivist, meticulously cataloging evidence. I saw the faint, smug curl of my aunt's lip, the way my mother would not quite meet my eyes, the patronizing pat on my hand from my uncle that felt less like comfort and more like a dismissal. I saw the complete and utter absence of anyone asking for my side, my plan, my feelings. The silence became my fortress. To speak would have been to engage in their fantasy, to plead my case in a courtroom that had already passed judgment. Any word I uttered, a question, a protest, a sob, would be instantly absorbed into their narrative as more proof of my hysterical, ungrateful nature. So I let the silence build like a pressure system, a gathering storm contained within the four walls of my own skin. I became a witness, not a participant. I watched them from a great, cold distance, and in that space, I saw the truth with terrifying precision. This was not an act of love. It was an act of control, a consolidation of power disguised as compassion. They had not saved me. They had sold a piece of my soul to maintain their own comfortable hierarchy and my quiet. Observant stillness in that moment was the first and most powerful act of rebellion I had ever committed against them. The arrival of the U.S. Marshals was a rupture in our reality, a moment of such brutal external clarity that it vaporized the carefully constructed family fiction in an instant. The doorbell was a normal sound, but the energy that entered with the two officers was anything but. They moved with a grim, unassailable authority that froze the very air in the room. The cheerful clatter of dessert forks ceased. The female marshal's voice was flat, devoid of the social niceties that governed our world, each word a hammer blow on the delicate glass of my mother's birthday party. "David Miller, we have a warrant for your arrest. The charges, wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement, were like stones dropped into the still pond of our dinner table, and the ripples were the looks of dawning horror on every face. I watched, my own breath held as the color drained from my brother's face, leaving a pale, sweating mask where the confident patriarch had been just moments before. The metallic click of the handcuffs was a sound so foreign and final, it seemed to stop time itself. As they guided him from the room, his posture broken, he briefly looked at me. And in that single electric glance, I did not offer the shock or the sympathy that filled every other pair of eyes. I let him see the cold, hard truth I had just excavated in my silence. I let him see that I knew. The strong offer on my house, the urgent need to pay my debts, it was all a frantic, fraudulent scramble to cover his own tracks. His crime was not just against some faceless corporation. It was against me, and he had used my family as his unwitting accomplices. The Marshals didn't just take my brother away that night. They delivered the evidence that vindicated my silent rebellion, exposing the real debtor in the family. Losing the house was the violent, necessary eviction from a life that was never truly mine. In the weeks and months that followed, as the scandal around David unfolded in court documents and hushed family meetings from which I was pointedly excluded, I realized the house was just a symbol. They had sold the physical structure, but what they truly stripped from me was the last vestige of my assigned role, the helpless sister, the financial burden, the problem to be managed. And in that void, in that stark and terrifying emptiness, I found a brutal kind of freedom. There were no more expectations to meet, no more performances to give for their approval. The debt they had used to justify their betrayal was, ironically, settled by the truth of David's crimes, leaving me unshackled. I started from zero, from a foundation of quiet resolve that had been forged in the fire of that birthday dinner. I worked, I saved, and I built, not for their applause, but for my own survival and eventual triumph. The new life I constructed was mine alone, its walls built with boundaries they could not cross, its rooms filled with a peace they could not disrupt. Their betrayal was the gift I never wanted but desperately needed, the spark that forced me to rise from the ashes of their narrative and claim my own. Let them have their whispers and their false piety. Your silence in the face of their judgment is not surrender. It is the quiet gathering of your strength. Your pain is not a debt to be paid. It is the raw material from which you will forge your unbreakable self. Let the world try to sell you out. Let them plot and plan in their self-righteous huddles. Your only job is to build something so authentically, powerfully yours that their announcements become nothing more than empty noise, and your life becomes the only testament that matters. 5 years later, I own a different house. This one has a wide, welcoming porch and a garden that is gloriously, messily my own. I did not invite them to the housewarming. The silence I cultivated at that birthday table has grown into a peaceful, purposeful life, one where my worth is not a topic for committee discussion. My brother pleaded guilty and served 18 months. The family, I'm told, still gathers. The conversations perhaps a little more subdued, the illusions a little harder to maintain. They never truly apologized. In their minds, they were still the heroes of a flawed story. I finally understood that their approval was the real empty house, a beautifully furnished facade with nothing of substance inside. They sold a building, but in doing so, They gifted me the vacant land on which I built my empire. And it is unshakable. So, if you are sitting at a similar table, listening to them narrate your life with their pity and their plans, remember this: your silence can be your strength. Your debts can be your fuel. Let them have their meetings and their nods. Your purpose is not to seek their permission, but to become so rooted in your own truth that when the storm of their betrayal passes, and it will, you are the one left standing, not just intact, but in full, magnificent bloom.